In this corner, John Byrne Superman from the Through the Ages box set by DC Direct. In this corner, Superman from DC Essentials. And in this corner, Superman from the DC vs. Dark Horse 2-packs by NECA. And in this corner, the DC Multiverse Action Comics 1000 Superman by McFarlane Toys. And in this corner, the all-new DC Multiverse Hush Superman, also from McFarlane Toys. Which Kal-El is the most classic comic book style 7-inch scale Superman ever made? Place your bets and stick around. This versus is out of this world. Welcome to 5 Points of Articulation, where I review action figures and then articulate 5 points to help you decide if you want to add that figure to your collection. The 5 points I discuss are packaging, presentation, posability, playability, and price. I'm Jason, and if you enjoy my content, please like, share, subscribe, do all the YouTube rigmarole. Starting off with the packaging, and while I don't have the box for the Through the Years set, it did look something like this, and on the back we can see that it came with a special comic book. Unfortunately, I don't have the original box for DC Essentials Superman, but I do have a DC Essentials box. These figures came in collector-friendly numbered window boxes, nice product shot on the side. If you have a bunch of them lined up, it makes for a very nice display, and then on the back we get another product shot, as well as bios, and a showcase of other available figures. The most bizarre of the bunch has to be NECA. For some reason, they weren't allowed to have any dynamic graphics, instead featuring only simple logos. In fact, there isn't even a logo for NECA itself. At the very least, the flap opens so you can see what you're getting. Just like DC Essentials, I don't have the box for Action Comics 1000, but I do have Superman Unchained, which was from the same wave. At a glance, these are identical to the way DC Multiverse boxes look now, with the only minor difference being that the McFarlane Toys logo is different. Otherwise, it's virtually indistinguishable from the new Hush one, save for that Superman 85 seal in the corner. That said, these more recent multiverse figures have QR codes for DC Universe Infinite, and whereas earlier releases showed you other figures in the wave, the new ones just have artwork on the back. This is the artwork that came with Action Comics 1000. Every one of these boxes has something going for it, not you. But when given the choice, I always prefer the collector-friendly, colorful, and informative DC Essentials. Out of all of them, DC Direct is probably the most cartoonish looking, but it's very true to John Byrne's artwork. Even though it's stylized, attention was paid to paint the eyelashes and those vibrant blue eyes, and also his mouth. The same could be said of Essentials, which has very vibrant eyes and a pleasant enough expression. Truth be told, NECA might be a little bit over-sculpted. Still, it is unmistakably Superman and does have proper paint for the eyes and mouth. Additionally, they went in and added some blue for the hair. Out of all of them, Hush is probably my least favorite head. For one thing, he's very pale and pasty with no color at all in his eyes. Although there is a bit of paint there, he doesn't really have any lips whatsoever, and in combination with the short neck and high shoulders, he just kinda looks stumpy. Out of all of them, Action Comics 1000 is probably my favorite head sculpt. The skin is warm and his cheeks are rosy, and the overall bone structure is pretty solid. He does lose a point for me, however, for not having notably blue eyes. Moving on to the S-Shields, and the McFarlane figures are completely sculpted. Action Comics 1000 has a metallic red, which is very fetching, but the symbol's been stretched out sideways and doesn't really look quite right. Hush has its own issues as well. Following the contours of the body, there is some distortion in the shape of the shield. It's particularly egregious down here where it looks to be pinched off. The shield on DC Direct is gigantic but more traditionally shaped. This figure sculpted the outer line but painted the rest. Essentials and NECA are simply tampoed on. And you know what? They look perfect. Between the two, I do like it better on Essentials though because it's a matte finish, whereas NECA is a big glossier. In terms of body, I really like DC Direct. The muscles and proportions feel super but also natural, probably because the body is reuse of a figure designed by Alex Ross. Because of the lack of articulation, it isn't broken up by a bunch of joints, and everything's been painted nice and crisp. Essentials, on the other hand, is a bit on the scrawny side. This is partly due to Essentials' notoriously long limbs. There are small details I like, such as having wrinkle lines for the costume, but then other details like his belt loops were not even painted at all. Additionally, the painted on trunks for the upper thigh don't really help. Also, because this is technically a reborn Superman, he has the extra detail around the cuffs. But one detail I do like is the glossiness of the boots in contrast with the rest of the reds. As for NECA, this is the same basic body they use for Batman and Hal Jordan, and it's a pretty good medium build. There's a lot more muscular detail than we've seen so far, but also some extra painted detail to add depth. The belt's a separate piece and is a little bit crooked, but I think that actually can be repositioned. And while it could be argued that this figure's been over-sculpted, there aren't any additional flourishes or details added to it. I can't quite say the same thing for Action Comics 1000. In addition to these sleeve cuffs we were talking about with Essentials, there's also extra ribbing and texture running down his sides and sculpted into the legs. They also added extra lines to his belt and belt loops. Also, this was from the first wave of DC Multiverse, so the joints were very obvious and distracting. Overall, I like the proportions on this figure, but I do have to admit the legs are a bit skinny. Even so, I feel like everything has been overdone on Hush. He has the same over-designed belt as Action Comics 1000, as well as a bunch of extra panel lines. He's also just very, very broad. Admittedly, too broad for my taste. I mean, seriously, could you imagine this guy as Clark Kent? Lois! I also have very mixed feelings about the colors. The brighter blue and yellow is welcome, but the red is practically neon. The reds on these three are near identical and I think ideal for Superman. The blues, however, on these two are much darker. If you were going to ask me to imagine a Superman blue, this is pretty much what I'm going to picture. Even so, I don't mind this. I also really love the cape. It's a very soft plastic that doesn't weigh the figure down. The length is very good for a classic Superman, and most importantly, it has the yellow S on the back. The length on DC Essentials is the same, but this one's a lot thicker, and sadly, no S on this one. Action Comics is the thickest and heaviest of the five. It's also a lot longer, but very regal. Alas, though, no S on that one. Hush has it, which is very much appreciated, though I'll be honest, I absolutely despise this cape jutting out to one side. Every time I have to do figure comparisons with one of these, it is a nightmare. I saved NECA for last because this is the most unique cape of all. It's actually fabric, and not only is it a pretty decent quality of fabric, it's also a very decent quantity. Customs are one thing, but usually when toy companies give capes, there's way too little fabric. This, however, hangs very naturally, albeit a little bit too much to one side. It's tucked very nicely into the collar, and still manages to have the S on the back. In my quest for the most comic-accurate classic Clark, I'm eliminating any Superman without an S on his cape. I'm also eliminating any Superman with superfluous detail. Between the sculpted and painted detail, and especially the cloth cape, I absolutely love NECA, but for a clean, classic Kal-El come to life, you can't go wrong with John Byrne. For presentation, this round goes to DC Direct. Moving on to posability, and obviously DC Direct isn't going to be as good. In fact, his head can only turn side to side. Essentials is on a ball joint and a hinge. Everyone else is on a dumbbell. They can look this high, with Essentials being up, and away the best of the bunch, and they can look this far down, with all four being fairly equivalent. Because he doesn't have a dumbbell joint, Essentials doesn't really tilt, but he does wobble because of all the times I've swapped the head. The other three tilt pretty much the same. Moving on down, DC Direct's arm is on a ball joint and can only raise this high. Everyone else is on a swivel hinge, and in order of reach, here we have Essentials, NECA, Action Comics 1000, and Hush. Additionally, Action Comics and Hush have rotator cuffs that allow for forward and back. No bicep swivel on DC Direct, but everybody else has it. Additionally, DC Direct and Action Comics 1000 only have single jointed elbows. The other three have double jointed elbows, with Hush having the deepest bend. Moving all the way to the ends of Superman's arms, and DC Direct has swivel wrists. Essentials and NECA have swivel hinge, and the two McFarlane figures have wrist balls that can swivel, as well as hinge side to side, or up and down depending on the way you point them. Shifting to the torso, and DC Direct has no articulation whatsoever. Not even a waist swivel. Essentials and NECA have waist swivels and ab crunches. Even after heating it up, NECA's is very stiff and I don't really want to push my luck. Essentials, however, can arch back this far. In combination with his neck, that's a great flying pose. And he can hunch forward this far. Action Comics and Hush have diaphragm joints and dumbbell waists. Using both, they can arch back this far, with Hush having the deeper bend. For those who are curious, here's Action Comics' flying pose, and here's Hush's. They can hunch forward this far, with Action Comics having the edge. I even go so far as to say he edges out Essentials, which almost never happens when comparing a diaphragm to an ab crunch. That said, all that Essentials and NECA can do is twist at the waist, whereas the two McFarlane figures can twist and tilt, with both Supermen being evenly matched. Below the bright yellow belt, and DC Direct only has T-style swivel hips, kind of Y-style if we're being particular. They can only kick this high. DC Essentials has ball-jointed hips. They can kick 90 degrees, and do a near-perfect split. NECA has a kind of ball-socket swivel hinge. His kick's on par with DC Direct, but his split's pretty close to DC Essentials. McFarlane has a similar system, but his has detents and a few more pieces. Action Comics can kick somewhere between DC Direct and DC Essentials. The split's really good too. Hush might be slightly higher, but not as good as Essentials, and his spread isn't nearly as wide. The McFarlanes also get a bit of twist in the hip, with Hush being the better of the two. NECA does something similar, but is way more functional. Only problem is you see that joint. But Essentials is the best of all, rocking a thigh cut. Traveling down the leg, and DC Direct has single jointed knees. He also has no ankle articulation whatsoever. The other four figures have double jointed knees, with Action Comics 1000 having the deepest bend. Essentials and NECA have boot cut rotation, but whereas NECA has ankles that can merely hinge and pivot, the other three have ankle balls that allow them to swivel, hinge, and pivot. That said, the NECA figure has something in common with the McFarlanes: toe-ticulation. The best articulated of the bunch. For posability, this round goes to Hush. Moving on to playability, and in addition to three other figures, DC Direct has a figure stand and a comic book I don't have because I got them loose. DC Essentials comes with nothing at all. The two DC Multiverse figures come with trading cards. They each also come with a flight stand, and they each come with a pair of alternate hands. In the case of Action Comics 1000, that means a fist and an accessory holding hand, as well as a pair of flight hands. Hush also has a pair of flight hands, but is preloaded with a pair of fists. In terms of accessories, NECA hit the jackpot. Not only does he come with a whole xenomorph to play with, for those wondering, it's a repaint of Alien Resurrection, but he also has a pair of flight hands, as well as an angry alternate head with his eyes gouged out, though if my eyes were gouged out, I guess I'd be angry too. But that's to accommodate the short burst of heat vision and these seriously cool longer beams. But playability is more than just accessories, it's also about how well your figures play with others. Starting with the other half of the world's finest, and here we have black and gray versions of Batman. Essentials is a bit too small for Rebirth, but absolutely dwarfed by three Jokers, though NECA scales really well with Rebirth. Depending on if you think Batman should be the same size or shorter than Superman, I think that Action Comics 1000 works either way, and honestly, same with Hush. For blue and gray Batman, and here we have Nightfall and Hush. If you thought three Jokers towered over Essentials, this is ridiculous. I do, however, like the combination of NECA with Nightfall. This one's a bit precarious because of the capes, but I do feel like the main takeaway is that Hush Batman is simply too big for any major Superman figure. For a transition from one character to the next, I thought we'd bring out the NECA Batman and Green Lantern. Although Essentials is still too small, you could fudge it if you had to. All three NECA figures share the same basic body, so obviously these three scale well. That said, I'm very pleasantly surprised by how well this works, and even this one isn't half bad. This brings us to Essentials and McFarlane versions of Green Lantern. Since all the Essentials are basically the same size, I thought it would be good to let you see how all the different Supermen stack against it. NECA could work with either, but McFarlane might be a bit too big for him. Action Comics 1000 is fine for both, and while height-wise I think Hush is fine, bulk-wise I think he's a bit too much for Essentials. Next up, and here we have the Flash. Essentials just barely works with the Target exclusive version. Seeing this one really makes me wonder what a NECA version of Flash could have been. This one, however, works with either, and while the Scarlet Speedster scale fine with this Superman, I don't like how bright his red is compared to Barry. Finally getting to a couple of Superman villains, and here we have Lex Luthor and General Zod. I'm pretty sure that Essentials would have his Kryptonian clock cleaned by either of them. In this instance, both of them are wearing armor, so being slightly taller wouldn't be out of the question. Naturally, these all work great, but I don't think either of them stand a chance against Swoller Man here. Lastly, for a couple of important supporting characters, and here we have John Kent Superman and Con-El Superboy. Based on its size and proportions, I honestly think that Essentials might do better as a classic Clark Kent Superboy. The blues on McFarlane are brighter and the symbols are bigger, but this could work. The blue might be a bit too dark here, but the reds are fine. In terms of color matching though, and this one might be a winner. For a relative scale comparison, and here we have Pizza Spidey and the Spectacular Spider-Man. If any of these was going to come even close to scaling with Marvel Legends, it would be this one. I like how the colors sync up with this one. Stylistically, these are a good match, and again, I just can't help but notice how neon Hush Superman's reds are. Either way, as always, here are all of our Supermen with Stealth Iron Man. Playability might be more than accessories, but they do count for something. And while I'll admit that in terms of scaling with other figures, Action Comics 1000 is my favorite Superman figure, for playability, this round goes to NECA. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price. If you want the entire Superman Through the Ages box set, it'll set you back between $100 to $150, but you can usually get this guy on his own between $50 and $60. DC Essentials is so highly sought after that as of this recording, there are only two on eBay, and both of them are $100. NECA's a unique situation because there are a lot of bootlegs out there, but the real set goes for about $100 upward. Loose Action Comics 1000 goes for $60, with new in-box going from $75 to $100. Hush, however, is hitting retail right now and is available between $20 to $22, so for price, this This round goes to Hush, who wins the battle 2-1 to 1-1. In terms of personal preference, however, if you could only ever own one 7-inch scale Superman, NECA's the best one that money can buy. Agree? Disagree? Sound off in the comments and tell me your favorite Superman figure. And don't worry, I do plan on covering 6-inch Superman figures at some point, but be patient with me. I've got some individual videos to get around to first. If you like this video, check out one of these. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again real soon, but until then, play nice and have fun.